Truistery Vibes warmly welcomes all our beloved listeners. We're so glad to see you again in our familiar time slot.
Today,
Truistery Vibes brings you a brand new story, one that we hope will touch your heart and stay with you. As you listen, feel free to leave a comment sharing the quote or moment that left the deepest impression on you. Wishing you a wonderful and meaningful listening experience. At precisely 6 a.m., the soft chime of a handcrafted wooden clock inched Ava, or rather, Sloane Evergreen, into wakefulness. The pale light filtering through the maple trees on her balcony hinted at another clear, crisp Asheville morning. As the newly minted director of marketing at a respected digital agency, she'd grown accustomed to early starts. Yet today's hush carried an undercurrent of unease that she couldn't quite shake off. Sliding out of her linen sheets, Sloane let her feet meet the hardwood floor of her cozy cottage-style home in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Parkway. She paused by the window, inhaling the faint scent of mountain air. Below, the forested slopes rippled with promise, possibility, freedom, a world beyond the carefully curated roles she inhabited. Still, the quiet shattered the moment her high-heeled slippers clicked against the floorboards en route to the bathroom. She gave herself a once-over in the mirror, soft waves of dark auburn hair, histrionic blue eyes hollowed slightly by last night's restless thoughts. With deliberate calm, she applied a touch of rose-tinted lip color, then slipped into a tailored cream-sheath dress, its lightweight fabric draping around her like an unspoken vow of professionalism. Descending the staircase, Sloane felt the familiar tug of responsibility. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen island with one reminder after another. Budget review at 9 o'clock. Team check-in. Client pitch deck. She tapped the screen, silencing the notifications, determined to hold onto this precious 0-minute margin between home and office. A narrow buffer, just enough time for coffee and a quick glance at her inbox. Before she could place her travel mug under the Keurig spout, the front door opened, its crack of wood announcing the arrival of someone who belonged not to her world of brand strategies and pixel-perfect presentations, but to the one she'd tried so hard to reconcile with. Eudora Whitlock, her mother-in-law, and a woman whose presence often felt as heavy as her surname, glided into the kitchen. Eudora's silver hair was swept into a neat chignon, and she wore a tailored blazer over a crisp chiffon blouse, her posture as precise as the lines of the antique wallpaper behind her. "Sloane," Eudora began, her voice cool, yet clipped like the north wind that swept the ridge above. "I have an executive luncheon at Biltmore Estate today. I won't be home for lunch." She paused, eyes narrowing. "You'll prepare a meal for Calder and Marlowe before you leave." Sloane felt her spine stiffen. At 30, she'd carved a reputation as a confident leader, unafraid to challenge norms. Yet Eudora's tone carried the weight of decades-old expectations, of a daughter-in-law who knew her place. She set her coffee mug down gently, turning to face the elder woman. The aroma of dark roast mingled with the tension in the air. "Marlowe and Calder can manage lunch today," Sloane said evenly, the conviction in her voice surprising even herself. "I only have 1 hour between meetings. It won't be possible." Eudora's lips pressed into a thin line. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of the coffee maker and the toll of Sloane's own heartbeat in her ears. Finally, Eudora stepped forward, as though crossing an invisible line. "Don't play coy,"
she snapped.
"Your duty as my daughter-in-law includes caring for this household, especially when I'm occupied." Sloane swallowed the knot in her throat. She had expected resistance, but not this blatant dismissal of everything she'd become outside these walls. A skilled marketer, an independent woman, a valued asset at work. Gathering her courage, she met Eudora's gaze without flinching. "Eudora," she replied, each syllable precise, "I respect your commitments, but I also respect my own. I've arranged for takeaway from Millwrights, and I've asked Calder and Marlowe to handle it. I need to be at my office by 8 a.m., not in someone else's kitchen." For the first time in months, Eudora's composure cracked, an almost imperceptible flicker of surprise that softened her stern features. Slowly, her voice dropped an octave, as though she was reconsidering her stance. "Very well,"
she said at last.
"but don't think I approve." Sloane offered a small, measured nod. No triumph lit her eyes, only a quiet determination, as if she were setting down a heavy burden she'd carried far too long. She stepped around Eudora, snatched her travel mug, and climbed the stairs 2 steps at a time, her cream heels clicking like a verdict. Behind her, the door clicked shut, and the tension that had filled the room seemed to dissipate with that single sound. The house fell silent once more, save for the rhythmic creak of floorboards settling. And in that silence, Sloane felt something new, the faint flutter of liberation, fragile as a dawn breeze. She paused at the top of the stairs, hand on the banister, breathing deeply. Outside, the morning sun gilded the peaks of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Today, she promised herself, she would carry that light with her, beyond the kitchen conflicts, beyond the glass doors of the agency, beyond the expectations that tried to hold her tight. Today, she would be wholly herself. The morning sunlight had barely reached its zenith when Sloane Evergreen found herself seated at the long mahogany table inside the Biltmore Estates' formal dining room. The ceilings arched high overhead, frescoes tracing intricate vines that mirrored the meticulously manicured gardens outside. Crystal chandeliers refracted the light into soft prisms. Servers in crisp black waistcoats glided about, refilling water glasses and offering silver-domed platters of herb-crusted lamb and truffle-scented risotto.
Sloane,
dressed in a tailored slate blue sheath dress, looked every inch the polished marketing director she was. Yet her pulse throbbed beneath the fine fabric. Across from her sat Eudora Whitlock, her mother-in-law, whose hawk-sharp eyes surveyed each guest with imperious approval. Beside Eudora, Calder Hawthorne fiddled with his napkin, clearly uncomfortable. At the table's far end, Marlo Wren scrolled through her phone, feigning interest in the estate's historic tapestry rather than the uneasy tension. The luncheon had been arranged to honor the anniversary of Sloane's late father-in-law, a gesture that, on paper, should have been a family bonding moment. In reality, it had become another stage upon which Sloane's duties as the perfect daughter-in-law were tested and found wanting. Eudora cleared her throat, signaling the other guests to quiet. "Before we begin," she began, her tone deceptively cordial, "I'd like to remind Sloane that the family expects her full cooperation this afternoon." Sloane's jaw tightened. She had spent the morning catering to Eudora's demands, coordinating flowers, approving menus, double-checking seating arrangements. Her own schedule had transformed into a ripple following Eudora's single command. "Yes," Sloane prompted, keeping her voice level. "We have arrangements at home." Eudora's gaze flicked dismissively toward Calder and Marlo, "and I trust you'll see to them." A hush rippled through the table. Guests exchanged awkward glances. Sloane felt her cheeks warm, an unbidden flash of anger rising. She had left her office at precisely the right moment to make it here on time, scrambling through fresh emails as she drove the winding roads from her condo by the French Broad River. And all that effort, all that meticulous planning, culminated in this thinly veiled insult. That her life belonged to Eudora's whims, rather than her own. She took a steadying breath and laid her fork beside her plate. The lamb remained untouched, the risotto half cold. "With respect, Eudora," Sloane began quietly but firmly, "I came here today to honor my father-in-law's memory and to support our family. I planned every detail this morning, so I would be free to return to my office and lead the afternoon's client presentation. If there's a specific task you need me to handle at home, I'd appreciate advance notice, so I can arrange my calendar accordingly." Silence blanketed the table. The chandelier's crystals gleamed overhead like indifferent witnesses. Eudora's mouth flicked, the slightest tremor of surprise knitting her brow. Slowly, she leaned forward, voice low enough that only Sloane could hear. "You forget your place," Eudora hissed. Just beneath the hush of polite conversation. "A daughter-in-law's place is here, serving her family." Sloane's heart pounded. Every instinct screamed to shrink away, to apologize and restore the peace. But something inside her had shifted, the unbreakable resolve she'd summoned that morning as she told Eudora no. She straightened her spine, lifting her chin. My place, Sloane replied softly but with unwavering conviction, is exactly where my responsibilities take me, both at home and at work. I will honor my father-in-law today, but I will not sacrifice my career or my well-being at a moment's notice. A murmur rippled among the guests. Calder cleared his throat, opening his mouth to say something. Anything, but the words tangled on his tongue. Marlowe glanced up, then back to her phone, clearly uncomfortable with the standoff. Eudora rose from her seat with an abruptness that sent a hush through the dining room. If that's your decision, she said, voice icily calm, then you'll find someone else to manage the household. With that, she swept past Sloane and exited the room, her skirts trailing like a storm cloud. Sloane's stomach twisted. A dozen pairs of eyes bore into her, some sympathetic, others scandalized. She pressed her lips together, murmured a brief apology to the hosts, and followed Eudora into the quiet marble foyer. Eudora stood near the grand staircase, viewpoint over her realm. At last she spoke, her voice tight. You've made quite the scene. Do you understand what you've done? Sloane dipped her gaze. She did understand, too well. She had stood up for herself, but at the cost of family harmony. I understand that I cannot let my life be dictated by last-minute orders, she said. I'm committed to this family, but I'm also committed to my career and to my own sense of self. Eudora's eyes glimmered dangerously. Family comes first, she whispered. Remember that. As Sloane walked away, the weight of the estate's ancestral portraits seemed to follow her steps. The late afternoon sun streamed through stained glass, casting ruby and emerald patterns across her path. Each colorful shard felt like a reminder, shards of tradition, fragments of expectation, and the vibrant possibility of choosing one's own path. Back outside, Sloane paused on the terrace overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. A gentle breeze carried the scent of rhododendron and pine. She let the wind sweep through her hair as she reflected on what had just transpired. The conflict at Biltmore had been more than a power struggle. It was a clarion call to preserve her autonomy. Her phone buzzed in her purse, a reminder of her 4 p.m. pitch deck review. Normally, she would have dashed back to her car and raced to her office. Instead, she found herself dialing her mother's number in Hot Springs, a call she had postponed for far too long. Her mother's warm voice answered on the second ring. Hello? It was as if the very syllable carried the solace of home. Hi, Mom, Sloane said, her voice catching with emotion. I need to come see you. There was a brief silence. Then her mother replied gently, Of course, sweetheart. Come on home. As she made the arrangements to leave Asheville behind, if only for a couple of days, Sloane felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief that she would find refuge in the tranquil springs and unconditional love of her childhood home, apprehension at leaving unfinished duties in the city. Yet for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to prioritize her own needs. Later that afternoon, she packed a small leather weekender bag, a few changes of clothes, her favorite notebooks, a soft cashmere sweater. She grabbed her car keys, pausing to take in one last look at the Biltmore Gardens, their manicured hedges and towering cedars. The grandeur impressed her, but it no longer defined her. As she drove north on the winding highways toward Hot Springs, the mountains rose like silent sentinels, their blue haze beckoning her onward. Each mile carried her further from the suffocating demands of Eudora's world, yet closer to the rejuvenation she desperately needed. By the time she crossed into her hometown's familiar narrow streets, Sloane felt a profound sense of direction. She was no longer merely stepping away. She was moving towards something vital, her own voice, her own boundaries, and the promise of healing that awaited in the quiet sanctuary of Hot Springs. And so, with determination steadier than the road beneath her wheels, Sloane Evergreen embarked on her journey home, ready to reclaim her life, 1 mile at a time. Sloane drove into Hot Springs as the late afternoon sun dipped behind the Pisgah National Forest ridges, casting long, rosy shadows across Main Street. She inhaled the cool, sulfur-tinged air and let the gentle cadence of her hometown, the occasional clang of a shop's wind chime, the distant trill of a robin, wash away the Biltmore estate's high-ceiling tension. Her mother, Elizabeth Evergreen, greeted her on the front porch of their modest craftsman bungalow. Elizabeth's warm smile and silver-streaked auburn hair felt like a balm. She wore a soft cotton cardigan over jeans and held out a plate piled high with fresh-baked corn muffins. "Welcome home, darling," she said, her voice rich with relief. Sloane set down her leather bag and wrapped her mother in a long embrace. For a moment, both were silent. Two generations of women who understood one another without words. Elizabeth held her tight, then led her inside, where the smell of simmering chicken stew and rosemary filled the kitchen. They sat at the scarred oak table, and Elizabeth poured them each a glass of sweet tea, the condensation beating like morning dew. Outside, the steam from the nearby hot springs drifted through the open window, carrying scents of mineral and pine. Over steaming bowls of stew, Sloane let her guard down. She spoke in measured breaths, recounting the confrontation at Biltmore. Elizabeth listened without judgment, gently nodding. "You did the right thing, honey," she said. "A daughter-in-law's place is beside her husband, but not at the cost of her dignity or dreams." After dinner, Elizabeth suggested a soak in the town's historic thermal pool. Under the glowing lanterns that lined Bridge Street, they strolled 3 blocks to the stone bathhouse. The building's rough-hewn walls and arched wooden doors looked unchanged since Sloane's childhood. Inside, the quiet hiss of steam and the muted echo of dripping water welcomed her. They stepped into the shallow pool together. The 100-degree spring water enveloped Sloane in a blanket of warmth, dissolving the tightness in her shoulders and loosening the knots in her chest. Elizabeth sank into a corner bench, patting the tile beside her.
"Tell me more," she invited.
Sloane closed her eyes and let the heat penetrate her bones. She spoke of Eudora's expectations, of Calder's hesitation, of the stifling weight she'd carried. With each word, the mineral-rich water seemed to draw out her anxieties. Behind her eyelids, she saw the crystalline patterns of the ceiling, like fractals of possibility expanding. After a long silence, Elizabeth reached out and squeezed her hand. "Rest tonight," she whispered. "Tomorrow, we'll hike the river trail. Then, I want to show you something I've been working on." The next morning, Sloane woke to birdsong and sunlight dancing across patchwork quilts. She descended the stairs to a simple breakfast: farm-fresh eggs, country ham, and biscuits still warm from the oven. Elizabeth handed her a mug of dark roast coffee. "No blackberry pie today. It's lemon blueberry, your favorite twist." They ate on the screened porch, watching smoke curl from neighbors' chimneys. Elizabeth spoke of small triumphs: her community garden plot yielding perfect tomatoes, her book club's lively debates, and Sloane found herself laughing for the first time in days. The easy humor reminded her why she'd fallen in love with these winding backroads and patchwork hills. By mid-morning, they set off on a hike along the French Broad River Trail. The path meandered through laurels and rhododendron thickets, past emerald-tinted pools where trout darted beneath rock ledges. Elizabeth pointed out wild ginger and trout lilies, gently uncurling new leaves. "Nature always finds renewal," she said, her voice low and steady. Sloane paused at a stream crossing, listening to water rush over mossy stones. She dipped her fingertips in, feeling its cool contrast to yesterday's thermal bath. It struck her that she, too, could balance fierceness and softness, fire and flow, just as the springs and rivers coexisted. Later, Elizabeth led her back to the house, where they entered the sunlit guest room. On a small desk lay a stack of canvas boards and jars of acrylic paint. "I started painting again," Elizabeth confessed. "I thought you might like to try." Sloane hesitated, recalling the frenetic pace of her corporate life. Yet as she picked up a brush, the bristles tickled her fingertips with possibility. They painted side by side. Elizabeth sketching rolling hills and dogwoods in bloom, Sloane layering vibrant swaths of cobalt and gold. Neither spoke much. Their strokes said enough. By late afternoon, Sloane surveyed her first-ever canvas, a bold swirl of mountain silhouettes under a lavender sky. She felt a surge of pride, not for perfection, but for daring something new. Elizabeth smiled, and in that moment, all the pressure from Asheville seemed to fade like morning mist. That evening, they sat on the porch again, sharing a jar of lemon blueberry jam on toast. Sloane realized she hadn't checked her work email all day. No buzz of notifications nagged at her peace. She closed her eyes and breathed in the night air, scented with honeysuckle and pine. "Thank you for this," she said softly, "for reminding me who I am, beyond titles and expectations." Elizabeth reached over and tucked a lock of hair behind Sloane's ear. "You've always known. Sometimes we just need to come home to remember." As the first stars blinked to life, Sloane felt her spirit realign with the rhythms of the mountains and the unconditional love of her mother. Tomorrow, she would return to Asheville with renewed clarity. But tonight, in Hot Springs' gentle embrace, she reclaimed the part of herself Eudora had tried to silence, and discovered the strength to carry it forward. Sloane Evergreen slid her key into the lock of the sleek condo building on Riverside Drive, her pulse fluttering with a mix of exhilaration and trepidation. For the past decade, she'd never imagined truly leaving the Whitlock family home behind. Yet here she was, standing in the lobby of a modern, glass-fronted high-rise overlooking the French Broad River, ready to claim a life defined by her own terms. Her moving boxes arrived just after noon, stacks of her favorite hardcover books, a framed print of the Blue Ridge sunrise she'd taken last summer, and the small potted fiddle-leaf fig she refused to leave behind. As she signed for each delivery, she felt a thrill of independence that pulsed stronger than any marketing campaign victory. Once the last box was inside her new two-bedroom unit, Sloane surveyed the bright living room painted in soft dove gray. The panoramic windows spilled sunlight across hardwood floors, casting luminous shards onto the minimalist furnishings she'd handpicked over the weekend. A low-profile sofa in slate blue, a sleek walnut coffee table, and a small bistro set by the window for early morning coffee. She closed the balcony door behind her and turned, arms outstretched. "Home," she whispered, savoring the single word. That evening, she settled onto the couch with takeout from her favorite gastropub, braised short ribs and truffle fries, and flicked through local channels. Yet even as the TV's warm glow filled the space, an undercurrent of tension crept in. She couldn't help noticing how easy it was to imagine Eudora's sharp gaze, inspecting every corner, every countertop, as if they remained joined by an invisible umbilical cord. Sloane stood, walked to the kitchen, and ran her thumb along the edge of the marble countertop. She reminded herself, this was her space now. No one could dictate when she ate, how she cleaned, or what she wore. Still, she set her napkin aside and washed the dishes, a habit from the family home she found impossible to break. By the time she'd dried the last plate, her shoulders ached from a day's worth of lifting boxes and scrubbing pots she'd just dirted. Tomorrow, she promised herself. Tomorrow, she would let herself rest. But tomorrow had barely dawned before the pings began. Her phone buzzed with a text message. From Eudora Whitlock. "Hope you're settling in. Remember, I'll be hosting a luncheon Saturday, expecting you to handle the flowers and catering details by Friday afternoon." Sloane stared at the words, a cold knot forming in her stomach. The luncheon would be at a private room in the Grovewood Gallery, a fundraiser for the Asheville Arts Council. Normally, coordinating flowers and menus was well within her event planning skill set. But this request dropped with less than 48 hours' notice, and it came with the unspoken expectation that she'd cancel any plans she'd made for her own apartment, her own life. She closed her eyes, took a breath, and tapped a reply. "Sloane."
Eudora.
"Congratulations on the Arts Council event. It sounds wonderful. I'm happy to help with planning, but I need at least a week's notice to coordinate vendors properly." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Within seconds, another ping. "Eudora, You're refusing family duty already?
We'll see about that.
Sloane's chest tightened. She tossed her phone onto the sofa, then grabbed her keys. She needed fresh air, and she needed distance. Stepping onto the balcony, she inhaled the river's cool breath and closed her eyes against the late morning sun. Below, kayakers skimmed the water's glassy surface. The city's skyline, an upbeat collage of renovated mills and dawnlit bridges, reminded her of why she chose this life: to blend ambition with authenticity, to create her own rhythm, unencumbered by anyone else's demands. Still, even as the breeze lifted her auburn hair, the sense of being haunted by her mother-in-law's expectations niggled at her. Sloane reminded herself that boundaries, once set, required consistent reinforcement. Today's test would be to maintain hers. Later that afternoon, Marlo Wren appeared in her inbox with an Instagram tag. Marlo Wren, Todd and I found a great route for the sunrise hike at Mount Mitchell this Sunday. Interested? #NoFilter sunrise over mountains. Marlo and her fiancé, Todd, had branched off from the Whitlock household drama, carrying on as though their shared lineage came with zero responsibilities. Sloane tasted bitterness. They didn't have applications to review, client presentations to prepare, or a new home to maintain. She typed back, "Sloane, that sounds lovely. I need to finish some work tonight, but I'll let you know by end of day whether I can join." "Breathe," she told herself. "You're allowed to protect your energy." That evening, just as she settled into her work chair by the window, laptop open, financial reports flickering on the screen, there was a knock at her door. Her heart leapt in her chest. She wasn't expecting anyone. She opened it to find a caterer's assistant, clipboard in hand. "We're here to confirm your order for the Sinclair luncheon," the young woman said, offering a polite smile. Sloane pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm sorry, but I declined that job. My schedule's booked." The assistant's face paled. "But Mrs. Whitlock confirmed you." "I'll call her," Sloane said firmly. She closed the door and dialed Eudora's number. The line clicked. "Eudora, it's Sloane. I'm confirming I can't manage your luncheon this weekend. Please communicate through email next time." She hung up before Eudora could respond. Sloane sank onto her sofa, exhausted by conflict and courtesy alike. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness behind her lids, she saw Eudora's icy glare and Marlo's careless indifference. She forced herself to inhale, then exhale slowly, each breath a tether to the life she was building. That night, she slept fitfully, dreams laced with images of Biltmore's grand dining hall recast as her condo's living room, guests turning into stern specters demanding her service. When dawn's gray light leaked through her curtains, Sloane knew she needed a ritual to reclaim the sanctuary of her space. She brewed a strong cup of Phoenix roast coffee from a local micro-roaster, pouring it into her favorite stoneware mug. Then she padded to her yoga mat and moved through gentle stretches, sun salutations, feeling her muscles awaken. With each inhalation, she visualized inhaling confidence. With each exhalation, releasing obligation. Afterward, she opened her journal and wrote, "Today I honor my commitments to myself first. I will not allow guilt or pressure to dictate my schedule. This home belongs to me. These boundaries belong to me. I am enough." Her pen hovered over the final phrase as dawn broke, flooding her apartment with a soft, golden light. She closed her journal and set it aside, knowing that words spoken and written held power. Later that morning, she received a third text from Everett Hawthorne. "I spoke with Mom. She's upset. Are you sure you want to handle this way?" Everett's text carried the same anxious tone he'd worn at the luncheon, torn between loyalty to his mother and his wife. Sloane took a sip of coffee, its warmth grounding her.
"Sloane,
I love you. I need you to trust me. Boundaries protect relationships." She hesitated, then added,
"Sloane,
"I'll handle the catering for her next event, because that's a reasonable lead time, but not this rushed one. I'm simply asking for respect." She sent it and stared at her phone, heart pounding. Within moments, Everett replied, "Everett.
Okay.
I'll talk with her." Relief surged through her. She placed her coffee cup carefully on the windowsill, its dark liquid reflecting the city below. Over the next few days, Sloane experienced small victories. She helped plan an upcoming fundraiser with adequate notice. She finalized marketing strategies for her own clients without interruption. And she declined an invitation to what would have been an emotionally draining dinner at her in-laws. Each time Eudora tested her limits, through a complaint, an offhand remark at a family gathering, or an email copied to the entire household, Sloane held her ground, responding calmly and redirecting expectations. At the same time, she cultivated a life beyond boundaries. She hosted a small wine and cheese evening for her new neighbors, joined a weekend pottery class in West Asheville, and accepted Marlowe's invitation to that sunrise hike, where the sky bloomed in raspberry and gold. As Marlowe reached out to steady her on a rocky ledge, Sloane realized the power of mutual support, something she hadn't fully felt in years. Each night, she returned to her condo, a place that was no longer a battleground but a haven. She sank into her sofa by the window, sipped herbal tea, and watched city lights glimmer on the river's surface. The echoes of Eudora's earlier demands faded, replaced by the hum of life she chose, deliberate, unhurried, and authentically hers. In those quiet moments, Sloane recognized the truth of her mother's words. One must sometimes stand alone to build the fortress of self-respect. And though the Whitlock family's influence still loomed at the edges of her life, it no longer had the power to define her worth. She closed her eyes, breathing in the soft river breeze, and whispered a promise to herself. Here, in this light, I am free. The courtroom air felt as sterile as the lobby's marble floor, but to Sloane Evergreen it was charged with the electricity of finality. She sat beside her attorney at the small wooden table, her palms flat, eyes fixed on the polished oak bench ahead where Judge Marissa Caldwell presided. Across the aisle, Calder Hawthorne stared blankly at the packed gallery, his face drawn and pale. Eudora Whitlock sat behind him, her lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes burning with a mixture of indignation and disbelief. A legal clerk cleared her throat and began the proceedings. Case number 24-0532, Evergreen v. Hawthorne. This matter comes before the court for a final hearing on dissolution of marriage and division of marital assets. Sloane felt a tight knot in her chest.
2 years ago.
She could never have imagined arriving at this juncture. Their love, when it first sparked, had felt like the most natural thing in the world, a fiery sunrise over the Blue Ridge Mountains. But over time, it had become a slow sunset trapped beneath storm clouds of expectation, control, and unhealed wounds. She inhaled, recalling her mother's voice from Hot Springs. Boundaries protect relationships. The wisdom of those words carried her steady through the past weeks of mediation. Judge Caldwell peered over her glasses. Ms. Evergreen, Mr. Hawthorne, the court has reviewed your settlement agreement regarding the division of assets, including your jointly owned condo at 321 Riverside Drive. She glanced at Calder. Mr. Hawthorne, do you consent to this settlement? Calder's voice emerged quiet and brittle. Yes, Your Honor. And you, Ms. Evergreen? Sloane met the judge's gaze, her own voice clear. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded, scanning the document before her. The terms are as follows. Ms. Evergreen shall retain sole ownership of Unit 14B at 321 Riverside Drive. Any outstanding mortgage debt shall be divided equally. Mr. Hawthorne waives any further claim to spousal support, and both parties relinquish any claim to the other's personal property acquired before the marriage. A hush settled. It was astonishing how concise the legal language could render the collapse of a once-cherished commitment. Is there anything else the parties wish to address? The judge asked. Eudora rose from her seat in the gallery, her voice sharp. Yes, Your Honor, I object to my daughter-in-law retaining the Riverside condo. It was purchased with joint funds, and... Judge Caldwell raised a hand. Mrs. Whitlock, this is not your hearing. Eudora's face reddened. She sank back down. Calder's shoulders sagged, as if he carried the weight of both relief and remorse. Then, The judge concluded, "I hereby grant the divorce. The marriage between Sloane Evergreen and Calder Hawthorne is dissolved. Let this be final." She rapped her gavel. Sloane felt a lightness slide through her, equal parts sorrow and release. The delineation of property and legal responsibilities had severed more than just physical ties. It had unclasped the invisible chains Eudora and Calder's indecision had wrapped around her sense of self. Outside the courthouse, late afternoon sun slanted across Haywood Street. Sloane stepped into the brisk air, drawing in a deep breath that tasted of autumn's promise. She spotted her mother waiting by the curb in her navy sedan. Elizabeth Evergreen offered a tight, proud smile and opened the passenger door. "How are you?" Elizabeth asked, as Sloane slid into the seat. "I'm okay," Sloane said, closing her eyes for a moment. "Stronger than I thought, actually." Her mother reached over and tucked a loose strand of auburn hair behind Sloane's ear. "You did what you had to do. I'm so proud of you." As they drove away, the courthouse's imposing white columns receded in the rearview mirror. For the first time in years, Sloane felt the forward momentum of her own life, unencumbered by half-lived obligations. Over the next week, Sloane settled into a rhythm that honored her newfound autonomy. She returned to the condo at 7 a.m. each morning not because Eudora demanded proofreading of menus, but because she wanted to perfect a presentation for a new client. She hosted gathering after gathering of close friends in her living room, transforming her once only partially furnished space into a warm hub of laughter, music, and art. She also faced necessary but painful tasks, splitting her wardrobe with Calder, returning keys, and changing her name back on joint bank accounts. Each act was a small incision, freeing her from the cellular memory of a partnership that had grown toxic. At times, she felt a sting of regret, not for the divorce itself, but for all the precious moments lost to conflict and fear, a quiet dinner at dusk, a weekend getaway at Craggy Gardens, the simple comfort of shared morning coffee. Yet with each passing day, those ghosts grew fainter, replaced by resilient shoots of hope. On a crisp October morning, Sloane awoke before dawn, driven by an impulse she hadn't felt in years to run. She laced up her sneakers and set out along the riverfront trail, her breath billowing in front of her like smoke signals of rebirth. The French Broad River shimmered beside her, mirroring her swift strides. As she rounded a bend near the old railway bridge, she glimpsed the pink and gold rise of the sun over the horizon. In that moment, her heart swelled, not with longing for what had been, but with gratitude for what could still be. Later that day, she drafted a new business proposal, a comprehensive digital campaign for a nonprofit arts collective. She poured her recent experiences into the narrative, framing the campaign around themes of liberation, self-expression, and empowerment. Every bullet point, every mock-up she crafted was a testament to her journey from suppressed spouse to self-determined professional. That evening, as she reviewed her work in the soft glow of her desk lamp, the phone rang. It was Thatcher Rhodes, her new confidant and steady presence since part 7 of her story. His voice was warm, bilateral in its steady cadence. "Hey Sloane, a friend of mine is organizing a gala at the Biltmore next month. Would you be interested in consulting on the digital marketing? I think they'd love your vision." Her chest lifted in surprise and delight. The very place where her former life had unraveled was calling her back, not as a subordinate caretaker, but as a celebrated expert. "I'd love to," she replied, her voice bright. "Tell me more." As she spoke, she felt the final vestiges of her old self, timid, apology-laden, drift away. The hush that once underpinned her confidence had been replaced by a clear, resonant tone. "I am enough. I belong." A month later, Sloane stood beneath the vaulted ceilings of the grand Biltmore Ballroom, once again surrounded by crystal chandeliers and polished marble. Yet this time, her role had reversed. Instead of a dutiful daughter-in-law attending to floral arrangements, she was the keynote speaker, unveiling a digital narrative strategy that wove the estate's storied history into the fabric of social media storytelling. The audience, composed of curators, philanthropists, and local press leaned forward at her every word. Flashbulbs popped, not to capture a scandal, but to spotlight her expertise. Eudora's face, inevitably present in a VIP box, was obscured by the grandeur of the moment. Sloane didn't seek her approval anymore. She no longer needed it. That night, as she exited through the estate's wrought iron gates, she felt the weight of every expectation she had shed. In place of guilt, there was possibility. Endless, uncharted, and thrilling. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth, waiting at home. "So proud. Love you." Underneath, a string of heart emojis. Sloane paused beneath the lamppost's golden glow, raised her phone, and typed back, "Love you, Mom." Onward. She pressed send, slipped the device into her pocket, and inhaled the crisp night air. The mountains stood sentinel in the distance, their silhouettes bold against a star-scattered sky. In that moment, Sloane felt every mile traveled, the literal distance from Hot Springs to Asheville, the emotional expanse from daughter-in-law to empowered woman, coalesce into a single truth. Freedom is not found in severing ties alone, but in choosing the life you were always meant to lead. Morning sunlight filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sloane Evergreen's Capitol Hill condo, warming the pale dove-gray walls and illuminating the rows of books on marketing, psychology, and Appalachian history neatly arranged along the shelves. At 6:30 a.m., she rose from her custom memory foam mattress and took a deep breath, stretching her arms overhead before padding across the reclaimed wood floors to her kitchen. There, she prepared a ritual she had carefully crafted over the past months. A strong cup of dark roast coffee from a local micro-roaster and a bowl of steel-cut oats topped with seasonal berries and a drizzle of honey. The calm deliberation of these actions, once rushed or subsumed by someone else's demands, felt like a declaration of self-respect. By 7:15, Sloane sat at her walnut desk, the morning's light bathing her laptop screen. She reviewed yesterday's work, a finalized social media calendar for a small winery outside Hendersonville. A client whose story of organic viticulture had inspired her to weave video narratives celebrating sustainable farming. She drafted a concise email summarizing launch dates and deliverables, then pivoted to her personal website, sloanevergreen.com, tweaking her bio to reflect the journey she had undertaken. The tagline now read, "Strategist, storyteller, self-starter." Each word pulsed with meaning. She no longer hid behind polite ambiguity or suffocated under others' expectations. She owned her expertise, her narrative, and her voice. At 8 a.m., she joined a Zoom call with Carla Nguyen, her financial advisor. Carla's bright tone filled the room as she reviewed Sloane's investment portfolio, a balanced mix of dividend-paying stocks, low-cost index funds, and a small allocation to a clean energy ETF. Sloane listened attentively, her confidence rooted in the knowledge that each dollar was no longer trapped by her former in-law's narrow views, but working toward goals she had set for herself: an emergency fund covering a year's worth of living expenses, a retirement account on track to double in 2 decades, and a rainy day envelope for unexpected travel opportunities. When Carla suggested a modest increase in her monthly contributions, Sloane agreed, without hesitation. Financial independence was no longer an abstract ideal. It was a living, breathing part of her daily decisions. By mid-morning, Sloane transitioned to her role as mentor. Each week, she reserved 2 hours for one-on-one coaching sessions with aspiring marketers, a program she had launched through her agency network. Today, her mentee was a recent college graduate struggling to negotiate her first professional salary. Sloane guided her through scripts, asked her to identify her unique value proposition, and shared the lessons she had learned negotiating contracts for high-profile nonprofits. As the mentee's voice brightened with each breakthrough, Sloane felt the powerful echo of her own transformation. Empowering someone else to claim their worth reminded her how far she had come from the days of silent acquiescence. Afternoon found her at a pottery studio in West Asheville, tucked behind a restored tobacco warehouse. The familiar scent of wet clay and kiln smoke greeted her as she settled at a wheel. the rhythmic hum of the wheel echoing her own heartbeat. She shaped a simple bowl, fingertips guiding the spinning clay with deliberate pressure. There was no rush, no judged expectations, just the tactile meditation of creation. Nearby, students laughed and exchanged stories between glazes and trims. Sloane listened, grateful to be part of a community where vulnerability and imperfection were celebrated rather than suppressed. Each rotation on the wheel felt like a reclamation of a creative spirit she had abandoned for far too long. Late afternoon, she returned home to prepare for an evening gathering. Sloane had invited a small circle of neighbors and colleagues for a casual potluck on her balcony, overlooking the French Broad River. Strings of Edison bulbs cast a warm glow across her cozy space. She arranged plates of roasted vegetables, hummus dipped with crisp pita, and a signature fall salad featuring buttercrunch lettuce, apples, toasted pecans, and a cider vinaigrette. There was laughter and easy conversation as her guests admired the view and shared their own recent triumphs and trials. For the first time in her adult life, Sloane felt the authentic comfort of belonging, not as someone expected to perform, but as someone invited to contribute her whole self. As dusk settled, she excused herself to her writing nook, a corner desk by the window. With a steaming mug of herbal tea in hand, she opened her journal and reflected on the day's activities. She wrote freely. The exhilaration of mentoring, the calm focus at the pottery wheel, the warmth of genuine community connections. At the close of the entry, she penned a mantra: "My worth is inherent. My voice is essential. My life is mine to author." She underlined it twice, letting the pen's ink soak into the textured paper like a solemn vow. Her phone buzzed with a message from Thatcher Rhodes. "I'm speaking at a nonprofit gala at Biltmore in November. Would you consider designing the digital storytelling portion?" Sloane smiled. The very estate that had once symbolized her subjugation now beckoned her as a trusted creative partner. She typed back rapidly, "I'd be honored. Let's discuss details over coffee tomorrow." Before bed, she took one final walk along Riverside Drive. The river shone like liquid silver under street lamps, and the cool night air carried the faint hum of distant music from River Arts District galleries. She paused on a bench, closed her eyes, and inhaled deeply. No shadows of past obligations lingered here, only the gentle pulse of a city that welcomed her growth. Returning to her condo, Sloane paused at the threshold, running her hand along the banister of the floating staircase, a structure she had insisted on during renovations as a symbol of her ascent. She turned on soft piano music and poured herself a glass of vintage red. Lifting the glass in a silent toast to her reflection in the window, she whispered, "To living intentionally." In that quiet moment, Sloane Evergreen understood that her rebirth was not a single event but a series of conscious choices to set boundaries, invest in herself, foster authentic relationships, and pursue her passions unreservedly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and undoubtedly reminders of past entanglements. Yet she was no longer the woman who had fled her own boundaries in fear. She was a strategist, a storyteller, a self-starter, continually creating, learning, and asserting her place in the world. And as she sipped her wine, she felt that place solidify under her feet, a testament to resilience, autonomy, and the unending journey of self-actualization. Sloane Evergreen had always believed that the heart lived on its own timetable, one that didn't heed legal documents, calendar alerts, or the rigid expectations of others. Yet, after reclaiming her freedom and rebuilding her life brick by brick, she found herself both eager and apprehensive when her mother suggested she meet someone new. That evening, back at the Evergreen home in Hot Springs, Elizabeth handed her a small envelope. Inside was a single index card, on which her mother had scrawled a name: Thatcher Rhodes. She raised an eyebrow. Thatcher. The name sounded like a strong wind or an old family crest, solid, unwavering. Her mother offered a reassuring smile. "He's a naval officer on temporary assignment in Norfolk," she said, "but he's been looking to transfer closer to Asheville. I thought it might be nice." Sloane tucked the card into her jacket pocket and let the conversation drift to other topics. Still, her imagination flickered with possibilities and dreaded what-if scenarios. Could she open her heart again after all she'd endured? 2 nights later, Sloane navigated the winding roads back to Asheville. The streets were quiet under a canopy of stars, and the scent of honeysuckle drifted through her open car window. She parked near a converted textile mill, one of the city's hidden gems, now home to the River's Roost, a low-lit coffeehouse perched on the riverbank. Its industrial windows and exposed brick invited patrons to linger, to watch kayakers glide by on the French Broad below. Inside, the atmosphere buzzed with the hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine. Edison bulbs dangled from black pipes overhead, casting a golden glow over wooden tables carved with initials and hearts. Sloane spotted Thatcher before he saw her, tall, his naval posture unmistakable even in jeans and a casual button-down. Dark hair catching the lamplight, shoulders squared yet relaxed. He stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, coffee cup in hand, gazing at the river as though it held all the answers. Her heart thumped in her chest, equal parts anticipation and residual wariness. She approached, offering a tentative smile. "Thatcher?" He turned, his expression shifting from concentration to surprise, then warming into genuine delight. "Sloane, hi." He extended a hand, then caught himself and swapped to a brief, respectful hug. "It's great to finally meet you in person." They settled at a corner table where tufted leather benches overlooked the water. Behind them, a soft acoustic guitar played through the speakers. Thatcher ordered 2 pour-over coffees from a barista who moved with effortless grace. As she stirred hers, Sloane studied him, strong jawline softened by a genuine kindness in his eyes, the faint lines around his mouth hinting at laughter enjoyed and shared. They began with the expected niceties, how her mother had described him, the peculiar charm of small-town hot springs, the way Asheville nurtured creativity. Yet even these familiar topics felt electric, as though the conversation carried a current of mutual respect and curiosity. Thatcher spoke of his naval assignments, long months at sea, the solitude punctuated by duty and discipline. He described Norfolk as a city of contrasts, bustling shipyards and quiet historic neighborhoods. Now that he was approved for transfer, he wanted a place that balanced energy with tranquility, hence his interest in Asheville. When Sloane shared her journey, her marketing career, the painful divorce, the rebirth in Hot Springs, Thatcher listened without interruption. His eyes never wavered, as though her story was the only one that mattered in that moment. "I admire your strength," he said when she paused. "It takes incredible courage to reclaim your life the way you did." Her chest warmed at his words, but she hedged. "I didn't do it alone. My mom believes in me fiercely, and I found allies along the way, clients who trusted me, friends who stood by me." He nodded thoughtfully. "You built your support network. That shows you know how to choose the right people." They shifted to lighter notes, the best local breweries, the hidden hiking trails that revealed the most breathtaking overlooks, weekend farmers' markets piled high with heirloom tomatoes and wildflower bouquets. Thatcher admitted he had a weakness for freshly baked sourdough bread, especially from a cafe in West Asheville that experimented with smoked sea salt. Sloane laughed, confessing that she'd already sampled their latest batch. Just last Sunday, in fact. Their ease grew. When he reached across the table to brush a stray hair from her cheek, she felt the smallest electric thrill. Not the frisson of early infatuation, but a deeper spark, the recognition that she was seen, not as someone defined by obligations, but as someone wholly herself. As the guitar music shifted to a gentle folktronica remix, Thatcher glanced at his watch. "I hate to cut this short," he began, "but I promised the navigator at the leasing office I'd drop off some paperwork tonight. Do you mind if we continue this over brunch on Saturday?" Sloane's toes, tucked under the bench, brushed against his. "I'd love that." They traded numbers, then lingered in the lingering hum of the cafe until the barista politely reminded them of closing time. When they stepped outside, the night air was cooler, carrying a hint of mountain mist. They walked side by side to their cars, a comfortable silence settling between them. At her door, Sloane felt the moment stretch. "Thank you," she said softly, "for listening. For tonight." Thatcher smiled, hands in his pockets. "Thank you for trusting me with your story." He hesitated, then added, "I look forward to hearing more." She watched him walk away, the glow of the street lamp catching his profile, and felt a quiet thrill of possibility. For the first time since her divorce, she sensed that love might be something she could accept rather than endure. That evening, she entered her condo and carefully placed the index card, Thatcher Rhodes, next to her journal, as though positioning a new seed for growth. Saturday dawned bright and cool, the morning sky tinged with pink. They met at a farm-to-table cafe in West Asheville, a cozy spot nestled between a pottery studio and an artisanal cheese shop. Over plates of poached eggs, avocado toast, and smoky bacon, they shared stories of family traditions, Sloane's father's annual maple syrup harvest, Thatcher's grandfather's tales from his days aboard the USS Constitution. Their laughter rose and fell with natural ease, and by the time they parted ways, Sloane felt as though she'd known him far longer than a single evening and a morning. Before he left, Thatcher paused in front of her car and said, "I'm grateful we met. You've shown me what true resilience looks like." Sloane smiled, a gentle warmth blossoming in her chest. "And you've reminded me that I deserve someone who respects my past and stands with me into the future." He nodded and leaned forward to brush a light kiss against her temple. "I'll see you soon." As Sloane drove away, the French Broad River shimmered to her right, its currents carrying her hopes forward. In her rearview mirror, she caught a final glimpse of Thatcher walking back toward the cafe, confident and steady. She exhaled, her breath mingling with the morning light. The path ahead was uncertain, no guarantee that this new love would last or that every moment would be as effortless. But for the first time in a long time, Sloane embraced the uncertainty with open arms. She had reclaimed her freedom, built a life of her own design, and now she had chosen to open her heart again. In the quiet thrill of that moment, she affirmed to herself what she had long since proved, that her story was hers to write, and that love, when forged in mutual respect, could become the most radiant chapter of all. The night air hung cool and fragrant as Sloane Evergreen stepped onto the terrace of the Biltmore's grand veranda, the moonlight dancing across the manicured gardens below. 2 years ago, this very estate had symbolized the suffocating expectations she had escaped. Tonight, it was the luminous backdrop to a triumphant collaboration, the Asheville Arts Collective Gala, a digital storytelling showcase she had spearheaded in partnership with Thatcher Rhodes. Under strands of soft white lights, guests in cocktail attire mingled, champagne flutes catching the glow like liquid stars. The chateau's turrets rose behind them, ancient stones whispering legacies of Vanderbilt grandeur. Yet the true legacy unfolding here was the one Sloane had crafted, a narrative of resilience, reinvention, and joy. Thatcher, in a charcoal dinner jacket that fit him like a second skin, guided her through the crowd. His hand rested at the small of her back, steadying, protective. She leaned into the moment, absorbing the warmth of his presence as they greeted clients, artists, and philanthropists whose lives had intersected with her campaigns. Each handshake, each word of praise, was a testament to how far she had come, from a daughter-in-law bound by duty to a visionary leader celebrated on this very stage. As they passed the projection screen displaying a montage of user-generated videos, local artisans' profiles, and behind-the-scenes glimpses of creative workshops, Sloane's heart swelled. The hashtag Artful Asheville glowed in bold letters, a digital beacon she had nurtured from concept to viral movement. Earlier this evening, she had spoken briefly, her debut keynote, delivered with poise and authenticity, about the power of community storytelling to heal divisions and spark growth. Applause still echoed in her ears, replacing the sting of past criticisms with a chorus of genuine admiration. A waiter appeared at her elbow, offering a flute of vintage sparkling wine. Sloane accepted, raising a toast to the shimmering crowd. Thatcher followed her gaze, his smile both proud and tender. "You did it," he said, voice low enough for only her to hear. Sloane lifted her glass to him. "We did it," she corrected. "I couldn't have shaped this alone." He nodded, eyes reflecting the light of the lanterns. "Your vision, my support. We make a formidable team." She slipped her hand into his, feeling the warmth of his palm. The world around them continued in its elegant swirl, but for a moment they existed in a quiet sanctuary of mutual recognition. The weight of every obstacle, Eudora's demands, the courtroom's gavel, the midnight doubts, had been transmuted into this singular, shimmering moment of affirmation. Later, as the gala wound down, and the last of the guests drifted into carriages and sedans, Sloane and Thatcher lingered on the terrace. The scent of magnolia and night-blooming jasmine mingled with the distant murmur of the French Broad River. Overhead, a few stars pierced the velvet sky. "I can't imagine a more perfect night," Sloane whispered. She paused, turning to face him fully. "Thank you for being here, for believing in me." Thatcher brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I've always believed in you, Sloane. From the day we met in that little coffee house. I knew then that you were someone extraordinary." She blinked back emotion, her pulse thrumming with warmth. "Extraordinary because of you?"
she teased.
"Extraordinary because of you," he countered, his gaze steady. "I just have a front-row seat to your brilliance." They stood in companionable silence, hands intertwined. The air felt charged with promise. Sloane thought of the journey that had led her here, the tense mornings under Eudora's gaze, the healing dips in hot springs, the solo moves and late nights of self-discovery, the cautious first dates and blossoming love. Each chapter had woven itself into the tapestry of her being. And now, on the cusp of this new chapter, she felt anchored in her identity and buoyed by possibility. Behind them, soft music drifted from the ballroom, a string quartet playing a modern arrangement of Appalachian folk tunes. Thatcher led her inside, and they drifted among the few remaining guests. As they passed a table of local artisans, a young potter named Lena recognized Sloane. "I can't thank you enough," Lena said, eyes bright. "Your campaign revived my studio's bookings and brought new patrons from across the region."
Sloane smiled, touched.
"You did the real work, crafting each piece with heart. I just told your story." The potter nodded, then turned to Thatcher. "And thank you, sir, for your support of the arts." Thatcher replied graciously. And together they continued through the gallery's hall, once a textile mill and now a beacon of creative exchange. Portraits of contemporary sculptures and mixed-media installations adorned the walls. Sloane paused before a striking digital projection of her own design, a collage of community-released short films celebrating Appalachian heritage, each frame pulsing with authenticity. The guests had watched these vignettes on their phones in real time, shaping an emotional bridge from past to present. At the far end of the hall, a raised dais held petit fours and a towering pyramid of champagne coupes. Sloane collected a raspberry tart and a glass, then turned to Thatcher, who offered hers. They clinked glasses, then savored the crisp bubbles and tart sweetness together. "You've turned creativity into community," Thatcher observed. "And community into purpose," Sloane replied, nibbling her tart. "That's what I want next, purpose, growth, connection." He nodded thoughtfully. "Then let's plan for it. I've been talking with my base commander about establishing an art outreach program at the naval facility. They want morale-boosting workshops for spouses and families stationed." Sloane laughed softly at his practical jump to action. "Always the strategist," she teased. He grinned. "Would you help me design it?" Her eyes sparkled. "Of course." This branching of professional and personal lives, no longer competing forces, but harmonious collaborations, felt revolutionary. Sloane realized she had arrived at a place where her passions and relationships only amplified each other, where partnership meant shared vision rather than subjugation. Weeks later, they found themselves on a quiet Sunday morning at the River Arts District. Sunlight slanted through industrial windows into a ceramic studio that Thatcher had helped fund. Sloane was demonstrating surface glazing techniques to a group of military spouses, while Thatcher answered logistical questions about rotating class schedules. Laughter and gentle chatter filled the space as participants dipped brushes into bowls of pigment and swapped stories of deployments and relocations. When the workshop ended, they stepped outside into the warm brightness. A small artisan market had sprung up along the riverbank. They wandered together, sampling handcrafted chocolates, admiring hand-woven scarves, and browsing leather journals made by a local craftsman. Thatcher slipped a velvet-wrapped box into his jacket pocket. Sloane's curiosity piqued, but she allowed him the moment, smiling to herself as visitors passed by, unaware of the tender secret forming in the folds of the package. Later, as they strolled hand in hand along the riverside path, he paused beneath a canopy of sycamore trees. He drew the little box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a delicate silver pendant shaped like a compass rose. "Sloane," he began, voice steady but soft, "when we met, I knew you had charted your own course. You taught me that true north isn't a fixed point. It's the journey guided by integrity, passion, and love. I want to walk that path with you. Will you be my partner on every road, every river, and every valley we explore together?" Sloane's breath caught. The pendant gleamed in the dappled sunlight. She reached for it, her eyes moist with emotion. "Yes," she whispered, voice trembling with joy. "Yes, I will." He slipped the pendant onto her neck, the metal cool against her skin. Then he drew her close, pressing a lingering kiss to her forehead. They stood together in that moment, the river's gentle current mirroring the steady flow of their newfound connection. Ahead of them lay uncharted adventures, deployments and homecomings, creative projects and personal milestones, but she no longer faced the future alone. That evening, their friends gathered at Sloane's condo to celebrate. The balcony overflowed with lanterns, wildflower arrangements, and the joyous buzz of conversation. They toasted the couple's engagement, each clink of glass a promise of communal support and shared dreams. Sloane looked around at the faces she had chosen as her family, colleagues who became confidants, friends who offered unwavering encouragement, neighbors who now felt like kin. Calder Hawthorne's name was never mentioned. It belonged to a chapter she had closed. Eudora's critiques were echoes she no longer heard. Instead, she was surrounded by people who celebrated her autonomy and uplifted her vision. As the night wore on, Thatcher led her to the center of the balcony, music drifting from inside. He opened his arms in a silent invitation to dance. Sloane smiled, slipping into his embrace. They swayed to a soft folk tune, her head on his shoulder, his hand to her waist. The city lights flickered against the river, the lanterns around them bobbed gently, and every worry of the past dissolved into the night air. In that embrace, Sloane felt the sum of her journey. The pain and triumph, the every refusal and every embrace, the solitary nights and the communal celebrations. She had rebuilt her life from the ashes of constraint, each choice a brick in the solid foundation of her happiness. Looking up at Thatcher, she whispered, "Thank you for walking this path with me." He brushed a kiss across her forehead. "Always," he replied. And that brings us to the end of today's story on Truistory Vibes. Don't forget to leave a comment with a quote or moment that touched you the most. Your words give our team the motivation to keep creating more heartfelt stories. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.